Autumn is here, and ever since the leaves have started falling, I really wanted to use them in my crafting again. Last year I did leaf stamping with acrylic paints, and this year I wanted to use mainly watercolors and make impressions with the leaves and create a beautiful, colorful background. I'm going to be making two backgrounds. For the first background, I'm going to be using the typical watercolors. I taped my cardstock onto a board just to avoid warping because I will be doing the wet on wet technique. And I picked this leaf. I think it's called Fern. This was my initial idea. I really wanted to use this leaf. To paint the background, I started by applying clean water all over the watercolor cardstock. And then I started dropping in the colors. This was a random application using red, yellow, orange, green, brown, and also a little bit of purple. I love the autumnal colors because here you don't need to worry that you get muddy colors, since that's the part of the autumnal color palette. Once I was happy with the look of the background, I took my leaf and placed it over the background and pressed it in. And then, to make sure I have a lot of vivid color, especially around the leaves, I used a very saturated paint and I painted around the leaves, really just to make that part more saturated. After I was done, I put it aside and let it dry. Painting this doesn't take too long. I think it took me about 10 minutes. So I decided to paint another background. This time I'm using the Nouveau shimmer powders. These are powder watercolors. They contain shimmer and are very saturated. The colors I used are pink, purple, blue, and green turquoisey color. I started by applying clean water across the panel and then I sprinkled the powders over it. To get the powder out, you just need to tap on the bottom of the bottle. Squeezing it spills the powder all over. It didn't react with the water as I wanted, so I took my brush and spread the color around, and I also sprinkled more powder and blended it in. These colors are so much fun, and while I would have loved to use more autumnal colors, these colors plus red are all I have from the Nouveau Shimmer Powders line. So here I used very random leaves. I just wanted to try what works. I placed the leaves on the panel and I pressed it onto the paper. I even used small stones to hold them down. And just like I did on the previous background, I used more saturated paint and I applied it along each of the leaves. I actually used the watercolors I used on the other background, but you can use the powders and mix them with water in a separate palette. My palette was dirty and I was too lazy and did not want to wash it. So instead I used the normal watercolors. And after I was done, I let the panel dry. Moving back onto my first background, which was semi-dry, and after I removed the leaf, it was a disappointment. At least it's not what I imagined. You could definitely make this into a card. So to try to improve it, I placed the leaf back onto the panel. I brought back the watercolor paints and I reapplied the colors all over the background, making it more saturated. And then I let it dry. I actually let it dry overnight. And I did the same with the second background, reapplying the watercolors along the leaves, just to make sure I was getting a good impression, and I also wanted the colors to be really vivid. The next day I removed the leaves and the impression wasn't what I wanted. I was thinking about to throw it into the bin and start again. Perhaps instead of starting with a clean water and doing the wet on wet technique, I could start with the paint right away. The trick here with this technique is to use very thin leaves. But I did not want to give up. The backgrounds don't really look that bad. They are just not what I had in mind. What I decided to do is to stamp a leaf using a white paint, just like I did last year with the acrylic paints. But instead of acrylics, I'm using here a gouache. This is just because I have this big tube with white gouache and I only have tiny tubes with acrylic paints and I'm running out. You can use acrylics or gouache, it doesn't matter. Acrylics are going to be more glossy, gouache is going to be matte. I applied the paint over the whole leaf and then I placed it onto the background. It took me a while to refresh my memory how I did it last year. Here I placed a paper and acrylic block on top of the leaf, but then I remembered all I needed to do is to press the leaf onto the paper so I get a good impression. Here I also used a sponge so I don't get my fingers dirty. The impression wasn't the best yet again. Maybe it's just the type of the leaf, I don't know. What I did here, I used a single leaf from the branch. I reapplied the paint, pressed it onto the paper, and it worked. It looks much better. I did the same for the second background. Here I used a branch with multiple leaves. I'm not sure from which tree is this branch. And I also used some of the smaller fern leaves. I applied the white paint over the leaves and I pressed it onto the background. I didn't want to cover the best leaf impression that I got, the one in the bottom left corner, so I placed the branch slightly higher. And then I used the smaller leaves and stamped them randomly. It did look a little bit off, especially because I placed the big branch slightly higher, but after I will add the greeting, it will look better. But first, I adhered both panels on top of a white card base using a liquid glue. I forgot to mention, before I stamped the white leaves, I die cut the panels using a stitched rectangular die, but this is completely optional. And lastly, I adhered the greetings. I had a few sentiments already pre-stamped and I adhered them using a foam tape. The greeting for the first panel I placed at the top. I didn't want to cover the leaf. And for the second card, I placed the sentiment at the bottom of the big leaf. I think it brings it all together. So that's it. This is a great example not to give up, and I hope you will try this technique yourself. It's a lot of fun. For more inspiration, watch the video where I did leaf stamping with acrylics. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video very soon.